As your presidential candidate, I want to talk to you about the ineffectiveness of the United Nations and why. Now, first, a little history on the United Nations. The United Nations, or UN for short, is an intergovernmental organization established by the signing of the UN Charter on 26 June 1945, with the stated purpose of maintaining international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among states, to promote international cooperation, and to serve as a center for harmonizing the actions of states in achieving those goals. The UN has primarily focused on economic and social development, particularly in the wave of decolonization in the mid-20th century. The UN has been praised as a leader of peace and human development, with many officers and agencies having been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, but has also been criticized for perceived ineffectiveness, bias, and corruption. I'm here to acknowledge that the UN is ineffective in its job, biased, and corrupted to its core. My first criticism of the UN begins with the inability of the international community to effectively respond to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. This has been the subject of significant criticism. Between 7 April and 15 July 1994, an estimated 1,100,000 Rwandans, listen here, 1,100,000 Rwandans, mostly Tutsi and moderate Hutu, were murdered by Interahamwe militia. With a UN force already in place and on the ground, this force was both unable and unauthorized to make any real attempt at stopping the violence. I'll tell you why at the end, my opinion. Critics blame the inaction of the UN in the face of a genocide as responsible for much of the damage. I state again one of the purposes of the UN, which is to maintain international peace and security. The UN was a total and utter failure in Rwanda. My second criticism of the UN is the legality of the Iraq War, which lasted from March 20th, 2003 to December 18th, 2011, in which the U.S. and the U.K. invaded a sovereign country against international law in the search for weapons of mass destruction and the claim that Iraq was a supporter of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda. The inspections during several months had found no evidence of weapons of mass destruction or prescribed Al-Qaeda terrorist activities within Iraq. The observer for the League of Arab States stated that the United States and the United Kingdom had waged war against Iraq at a time when Iraq was positively cooperating with the United Nations inspectors, who had stated that they only needed a few more months to discharge their task, which would have found nothing. The real reason for the attack was the occupation of the country, its recolonization, and control of its oil wealth. Bingo. The ousting of Saddam Hussein also left a power shift for the rise of Iran in the Middle East, Iran's subsequent influence on Iraq to this day, and the rise of ISIS, if you remember them. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that the Iraq war was unjustified. In a televised conference before a meeting with the U.S. envoy to Iraq, Putin said that the use of force abroad, according to existing international laws, can only be sanctioned by the United Nations. This is the international law. Everything that is done without the UN Security Council's sanction cannot be recognized as fair or justified. Don't worry, we go get to Putin in a second. Here again, not only did the UN fail Iraq, the US and the UK took it upon themselves to undermine the authority of the UN, violating the UN Charter and international humanitarian law. Let's fast forward to the present, and we find ourselves in a similar situation. After Vladimir Putin stated the US-led Iraq war was unjustified, Russia annexed Crimea and began a war against the country of Ukraine. Like my grandmother used to say, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Russia is taking the same actions the U.S. has done in the past. So why should we be mad at Russia for doing what the U.S. has done in Iraq? Which is to stick a middle finger up at the UN and break international law. Again, I go back to the purpose of the UN, which is to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among states, and to promote international cooperation. Again, the UN failed in its purpose. My third and final criticism of the UN is the ongoing conflict between the Palestinians and that little country in the Middle East. For decades, we've heard the UN call for peace in the region. Those calls by the UN for peace in the region have fallen on deaf ears by that small country in the Middle East for decades. Now we're at a point in these tensions where a sitting U.S. president proposes U.S. control of Gaza in a move that will permanently displace the Palestinians. So what does that small country in the Middle East do? It commences a ground offensive to complete the task of what the UN fails to call these continued actions: genocide. The UN and the world at large have a real world genocide happening that's displayed on the news nightly for the world to see, and no one is doing anything about it but threatening sanctions against that small country in the Middle East. Why wasn't a UN peacekeeping force deployed to that area to maintain peace and protect Palestinian civilians? This is the bias of the UN on full display. If the Palestinian land had oil underneath, like Kuwait, which prompted the U.S. and other countries to engage in a Gulf War against Iraq, I'm pretty sure a UN peacekeeping force would have been deployed. I guarantee it. If Rwanda had oil, the UN would be involved in maintaining peace. I'm sure of it. I'll finish off the ineffectiveness of the United Nations by stating that world leadership is also to blame for the ineffectiveness, bias, and corruption of the United Nations. The world leaders who make up the United Nations itself are corrupt. How can order and world peace be maintained in a world where the world leaders can go against international law without consequences? That's the world we live in today. A world where the main countries with nuclear arms and a UN veto power, China, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States, can use whatever cowboy diplomacy and land grab tactics around the world while destabilizing countries and hurting civilian populations around the world. These countries, including our very own United States, ignore genocide and disclaim that it's not happening. You have to ask yourself, what have we become when the United Nations doesn't do its job in maintaining order in the world? We get the lawlessness we have now. As your president, I'll provide the leadership necessary to ensure we not only do right by the people within the United States, but also outside the United States in our foreign policy dealings. This prevents conflicts and wars, which saves us the taxpayers' money in the long run, so we can use that money for us, the citizens, infrastructure rebuild. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. What I am is a reformer, the one who will not destroy and challenge the Constitution, but the one who will work the hardest to bring peace to the world. As I always say, peace saves money for the United States and its citizens. Constant war, conflicts, and the ineptness of the United Nations keep the military-industrial complex fully funded and fed. They feed off war. I believe the UN can be a beacon of hope for world peace if the leadership within abides by the rules set forth. If the rule of law is not followed, chaos and conflict will continue to flourish around the world, leading to war, possibly up to a nuclear catastrophe. Tell me your thoughts on how you view the United Nations. Is it effective or ineffective? Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, I wish you fair winds and following seas. Senior Chief out. If I was president, I get elected on Friday, assassinated on Saturday, buried on Sunday.